Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Artists founded the Slade in 1871, as Mia had shared, and it has been led by artists ever since. And befitting to this legacy, the Slade Anniversary Exhibition is artist-led. Students from across all programs were invited to reflect on their art school's past and its present and its future. And the exhibition, for those of you who are not so familiar with UCL, is located in our Octagon Gallery, which is situated at UCL in the main building under the dome. You can see here to the side of it, the Art Museum, and to the left, the Slade. It's the outcome of dialogue and collaboration between students and staff at the Slade with museum curators, with freelance exhibition team, and with others at UCL. My role as the curator in this exhibition was actually to draw together everyone to create the environment for collaboration and support. And importantly, it was to ensure that we create a coherent and meaningful exhibition for an experience for the visitor. It was very important to us, the team working on this exhibition, to retain the voices of the visitors, to retain the voices of the artists in the process and in the display, and in this carried over into the interpretation. And we worked together with the Slade curatorial team. There were about 5 artists who teach at the Slade who were involved in this process. And it's in this spirit that actually I've tried today to share the voices of the artists who aren't present with us in this presentation and share with you. We are fortunate to have 3 students, as Licia, as Mia had mentioned, joining us today, and this is Licia Santos, Corellia Stergydis, and Abby Ola, and that's an introduction in the order of their appearance, and I will be inviting them to join throughout the presentation of the other artists' work. In total, there were 14 artists in this exhibition, so it's quite a lot to cram in for you today. Fortunately, a few of these worked collaboratively, so it's actually just one work. So here are just a few slides and glimpses of what we might see later, a little bit more of. But also for those who are new to the Slade, these images are of the Slade. One is the historic image and from UCL records, and the other is a contemporary photograph of the Slade today. And the lawn in front of the school has always been an informal space for the Slade staff and students to gather together with the community beyond the Slade at UCL and London and beyond. And this is reflected also in the contemporary work of a number of artists in the exhibition, including that of Licia Santos. So Licia, I will invite you to start us off here, and I'm going to hand over to you whilst sharing this slide.
Hi, everyone. My name is Licia Santos. I'm a visual and performance artist based in London. I'm from Angola with mixed heritage, and I'm completing my MFA at Slade School of Art, just about to graduate. I work mainly in the fields of painting, drawing, and dance. And my work explores the interplay between body and nature. But for this work in specific, for this exhibition, I wanted to experiment with printmaking. And my work was very much about the print workshop. I developed a series of etchings based on live drawings of my peers in the studio, the workshop, and as Nina mentioned, outside spaces such as the green. I think these are spaces of exchange to each other that contribute very much to our creative process and learning. And I also took inspiration from a former student at Slade, Paula Rego. She mentioned in an interview that she found refuge in the printmaking workshop, and I understood that these feelings are passed from generation to generation of artists. That's also the title of my series. I think broadly this idea of refuge summarizes the work and beautifully describes what the Slade is as a community and place to all the artists who have been at the Slade searching for guidance, exchange, and growth.
Thank you very much, Licia.
Thank you.
The painting featured in the next slide, also in the exhibition, is part of the work of Sophie Knight. The painting from 1924 is that of an artist called Shorsha Makantionik. He won the prestigious Summer Competition Prize in that year. As you can see, it shows a group of students and staff gathered together on the front lawn of the school. The central figure is that of Henry Tonks, who was the Slade professor between 1918 and 1930. And he's surrounded by a large cohort of students, which includes artists such as Mary Adshead, Eileen Agar, and Winifred Knights. You can see them, I've picked them out here on the right. These are celebrated names in a long list of women artists who went to the Slade and won many of the school's prizes. Sophie spoke of Makantionik's painting as a timestamp for Slade students' day-to-day activities. She said it connects me both to space and time, to a historical building with its recognizable facade, and a joyful gathering of students pursuing the same interests and sharing with one another, just as I and my cohort do now. Sophie added a series of her own paintings to Makantionik's. You can see them here. And while Makantionik's painting is characteristic of the Slade at this time, this means a sort of reserved color palette and a penciled grid under the paint that the artist, you can see, has aligned with the windows. Sophie, on the other hand, brings a fluid, expressive quality to her treatment of the windows. And the paintings, when they're all grouped together like this, evoke the aesthetic of an Instagram tile. Sharing the same case of Sophie's work is the work of Corellia, Stergydis, who is here with us today. To the left is an image that Corellia took in her home in Cyprus. It's important to mention in the process of this exhibition development that during the period we were working on it, all the students were remote. No one had access to the workshops and no one was on campus. Corellia made the work in Cyprus and brought it back with her. So now with great pleasure as well, Corellia, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Nina. Hi everyone, I'm Corellia Stergydis. I'm also in my final year of my MFA in Fine Art Media. I'm based both between London and Cyprus, and I work as a multi-medium artist. I interweave autobiographical narratives in my work, exploring the vital politics of care and emphasizing on non-human species, observing my family relationships, and now more so specifically my mother and her cats. In Nyam Wam Meow Mama, I was interested in the act of imprinting and where this is enacted in public gestures towards animals. Public gestures of care. So focusing on the stray cat that transitions between its role as domestic and public pet, and exploring how I can memorialize these exchanges and encourage these encounters. I was inspired by Slade resident scientist Ruth Siddle's tour, whereby we explored stone pavements and even horse trough term planters, and became really interested in the animals who live, who could live in the Slade's vicinity or have lived in the Slade's vicinity. I made them in parallel to the Beuys anniversary at Goethe with the theme of social sculptures. So I had these two themes in mind, social sculptures and past, present, future. My research began documenting gestures of claiming public space with dishes of water and food, from people using temporary one-use plastics to semi-chip salad bowls from their kitchen. My cat Bambi, who drank from our kitchen faucet, had passed away at 18 at the time, and also looking at the rumored resident cat that occupied the Slade. The project introduces for the first time, object making in my practice alongside drawing and sound. I chose to use ceramics because of their connotations to domestic living and challenge both the fragility of what a monument means and also the gesture that it was suggesting. The textures I used in the installation connect to what I had accessible. So I had a lot of large boxes of cat food from the pet shop in lockdown, and they were also inspired by the shelter both created for the cats to sleep and eat under that I documented earlier in my research. Conversations with Nina brought up ideas on the different ways ceramic bowls are displayed in museums. The color of the cardboard actually triggered the use of light brown card inspired by historic papyrus paper. And a keen occupant to my cardboard maquettes was my cat Clary, who would sit in the ceramics. So I decided to life draw her eating out of them. And those are the images that you see displayed behind the work. Drawing on the napkins retained a sense that the vitrine was lived in and not so propped up. And placing them under the plates traced me back to me eating dinner as a kid and drawing on all surfaces. As you see, parts of the poem are written inside the ceramics so that when the audiences experience the work in the gardens of the Goethe, they needed to prop down on all fours like an animal to read them. And so I tried to echo this in a display at Slade so that in this way, maybe the next would be required to read the poem. And poetry is something I use in my process so that I can establish a narrative that organizes all of these tangential experiences into a formula and allows me and the audience to embody the character of the work, which in this case was a cat. Yeah. Thank you.
So much, Corellia. Indeed, there was the cat that is rumored, a part of the intangible heritage at the Slade. There's rumors, lots of rumors that there was a cat that inhabited the life rooms to keep away the mice. And also there were horse stables, very close proximity to the Slade. Just a note, we might not have mentioned to those of you who don't have your chat function open that our wonderful colleague Chris is behind the scenes adding links to the artist's social media and web links and contextual information as we go through the presentation. So thank you, Chris. Moving on, 45% of the artists at the Slade in the Slade collections are women. Oops, this is not working. There we go. Thank you. Yes, 45% of the artists in the Slade collections are women, and their prize-winning works were retained by the school, and today they're held with UCL Art Museum. One of these prize-winning students was the artist Maynard Helmy. She came to the Slade from Egypt in 1953. And she later became a celebrated Egyptian modernist with an international reach. Helmy features in the exhibition by way of the work of Latifa A. Stranak, and now an MFA graduate. Latifa wished to research a female artist who studied at the Slade with roots like herself were in the Middle East. And of her work, her own work, Latifa says that she seeks to capture fleeting moments in which to reframe the presence and absence of family members and belongings. And of her encounter with Helmy, she has said that I felt a deep connection from her hand to my eye and back to my own hand. The work in the exhibition celebrates drawing and color and pays homage to Helmy's paintings and prints. You can see here that the drawings were stitched together in a book that extends like an accordion. And this is, for me, an expression of mark making and shared history across time and place. The dialogue with Helmy extends online with an animation film, which you will be able to see appear in your chat. Another artist who found echo of their own experience in UCL's art collections is Emily Mannion. Mannion's work celebrates the domestic space. She creates narrative vignettes drawn from art history, personal experience, film, and literature. And Emily encountered Gwen John when she was looking at the Art Museum's collections. John studied at the Slade in the 19th century. And although now she's a recognizable name to some, in her lifetime, John was largely overlooked. And she often painted solitary female figures. Emily has filled the exhibition showcase with a grouping of graphic expressions that combine images and works appropriated from John with contemporary sources like music lyrics. They're suspended in the display case as if they were a snapshot from a book or maybe even a memory. And Emily has said, I recognized echoes of my own work in her choice of everyday subject matter, painted in closely related tones. Later in life, Gwen John converted to Catholicism and her lone sitters became nuns. And Emily herself has shared with the visitors in the exhibition that many women in her own family, she comes from Ireland, became nuns, and their portraits were dotted around the house. She writes in the exhibition text, "This work is in memory of them and Gwen John." Also working with text and image and in dialogue with an artist from the past is Chila. Chila is a PhD candidate working on interdisciplinary research with UCL Linguistics. In her work, she explores the intersection of language, images, and thought with a particular focus on the artist's book. She's interested in the role of metaphor and emotion that arises through this art form of the artist's book. Chila was looking back to the start of the 20th century to a controversial artist who studied at the Slade called Wyndham Lewis. He published an iconic magazine called Blast that was a short-lived publication that began at the start of the Second World War. It was radical in its bold design and contrast to the Victorian publications that were in circulation at this time. Chilia's work reflects on Lewis's first edition of the magazine. It contained a list of things that people and ideas which were, according to Lewis, either bless or blast, meaning the ones that he agreed with or he disagreed with. These letters are cut in a durable material, but it looks like paper. And Chilia has created these cloud patterns with layers that overlap and prevent the words from emerging clearly individually. The work is as much about ideas as it is form. And also Chilia's work, you can see in the photograph in the right, there is a QR code at the base of the case, which Chilia herself designed. And this links to a text online, which I believe Chris would share with us. Sharing the arresting effect of black and white graphic aesthetic is the work displayed in an adjacent case by Abby Ola. Abby takes a very different approach to patterns, and fortunately she is here with us today and will be able to share with us her experience of graduating in the midst of a pandemic and progressing with her work. Over to you, Abby. Thank you.
For my work, Patterns in My Bedroom, the photography series installed in the Slade's 150th anniversary exhibition, it connects to my experiences at the Slade in terms of using UCL's archaeological artifacts, ancient African and oceanic textiles. The Slade offers a plethora of research materials such as oceanic textiles and African textiles. I hope for the audience to see the relationship between archaeology, art, and modern-day emojis. Due to the pandemic, it has forced me to explore new media with my artworks, such as photography and digital drawings. Using the Slade and UCL's resources, such as cameras, screen printing, art books, drawing tablets, and archaeological artifacts, has been extremely beneficial for me in terms of learning how to use them. I now can use these things on my own. For example, when I had to work from home due to lockdown restrictions, and now I'm an independent artist. Being at the Slade on its 150th year is an historic moment that I'm glad to be a part of. It is even more memorable because of the coronavirus pandemic and its impact on the way I was able to experience these past 2 years on my MFA program. For me, being at the Slade is inspirational, and it is a privilege to learn in the same university as many famous artists that I am inspired by, such as Michael Armitage, Phoebe Unwin, Jade Fadotimi, and Paula Rego.
Thank you, Abby. Moving on. Due to the neoclassical architecture of the Slade, the school is largely hidden from view. And often what happens within its walls has in many ways been perceived as inaccessible. This narrative of isolation is often carried over from architecture to institutional biography. But this perception of the Slade as an island obscures multi-layered narratives of networks that is as inspiring as it is complex. The school carries the imprint of its founding principles through its intangible culture, like the conversation we had about the mouse, through its archives and collections retained, those included, for example, in the work of Abby. But the building and materials also tell stories, different ones. This is captured in the exhibition in the work of Robert Mead. Robert is a PhD candidate whose research draws on the materials research project founded at the Slade by artist Joe Volley. He's described his process as digging up histories and ghosts of our past, which linger in the changing landscapes of today. And he's interested in painting's relationship to geology and science. In this contribution, he highlights a historic relationship between the Slade and the chemistry department. In the foundational years of the school, the Slade occupied the first floor and some of the ground floor. Physiology occupied the top floor and chemistry, the basement. There are included reproductions of maps. You can see these in the middle photo here, peeping out. Reproductions of maps that show the layout of the building, and there are other documents and pigments from the materials research project. And the image on the right shows a drawing that depicts this connection between the Slade and the chemistry department, where you can see the students from the Slade standing on tables to look through and see what was going on in the department adjacent to them. But during this period, students also learned about the chemistry of painting. And this legacy of experimentation with materials continues till today. And you can see here on the left, Robert features a new pigment that he harvested from a battery. And with it, with this pigment, he created 2 new paintings, which are also included in the exhibition. The Slade building also offered a starting point for a duo of artists, Moza Al-Mazrui in the area of sculpture and Hampus Ho in the area of media. They claimed the Slade building as an archaeological site. In their words, in their words, they found in its anatomy dust and discarded rocks that contain time, like fossils. They understood art practices conducted at the Slade to be in dialogue with the building, its walls, its corridors, complete with remnants of students' previous lives, not students' previous lives. They chose to move their gaze to neglected artifacts to show that history can be revealed as more malleable. And the sculptures that they created from the rocks and the building fragments serve as remnants to alternative worlds from the one we ourselves inhabit. Another duo of artists working together are Nikki Coendell and Katie Mess. They were interested in exploring their relationship to time, as well as organisms and landscapes that live alongside us. Their work combines the use of both analog and digital photography, filmmaking, words, and sculpture. And for the Slade 150 exhibition, they wanted to add their own version of a time capsule to the ones that are rumored to be buried in the Slade grounds. Their capsules exist for the future and are intended to be buried in the grounds at the end of the exhibition. You can see in the image in the middle that there is a news article that is a bit like a fake news, but reads like real news about the Slade time capsules. And they made their capsules out of ceramics, which they say they selected because of its ancient usage and protected properties. They were reflected on the lives of student past whose stories have been lost. They also include the analog film that is itself a threatened media, threatened by time and erasure. The capsules are displayed in the cases with their contents. In their words, art has an ability to say more than the artist can say and live longer than the artist can live. And now we move to the last contribution. This is also by a duo that have been working between London and Lahore in Pakistan. It is perhaps the most intimate work in the exhibition by Irfan Hay and Murtaza Zaidi. The collaborative project devised from the Print Pal program that connects the Slade students with the National College of Arts in Lahore in Pakistan. The project is currently on display in UCL Art Museum in the sister exhibition called Testing Ground. Irfan and Murtaza got together to share their favorite love poems, Sufi poetries, and some diary entries about crushes in their words. They ask, what do we have? Why do we have to translate and speak many tongues And who are we considering when we translate Urdu and Mandarin text into English? Their three-language title of their work translates into English as A Love Letter That Must Have Been Mistranslated in Parts. The work also consists of a QR code, a scanned video, and a set of prints. Murtaza created prints and Yifan video that includes the scanned prints and the text. The textured prints have been, with the dark hues that you can see here, have been wrapped around the inside of the display case like a wallpaper, and they've created a feeling of a cave in which there is a delicate scroll, which is a printout of their correspondence. Yifan has said, "The Slade to me is a safe environment to make quirky or intimate works and tackle moody topics such as love. I hope this will be preserved for the future to encourage people at the Slade to feel comfortable, to experiment and stutter." I think with these words that I feel are very moving, we will wrap up, and I will leave you with this last slide, which depicts a specially produced time map that was created for the Testing Ground exhibition by the Testing Ground team. And it features in chronological order the names of all who have studied or worked at the Slade since 1871. It captures important events and initiatives, including developments to the art school's building. It is a record in progress and will be added to as more names and dates come to light. It is titled "Thanks to Everyone for Everything," and that's what I'd like to do today. Thank you, everyone. We have some time for questions. Mia?
Hiya, yes, so sorry, I know you can't see me right now because I'm not spotlighted, but if the audience would like to leave any questions or comments in the chat for the students or for Nina about any of the exhibitions, or about the processes or about studying at the Slade, I would personally quite like to know, Corellia and Lissia in particular, because you didn't necessarily talk about it explicitly in your presentations, the experience of having to study maybe in isolation, maybe with limited supplies, maybe far away from home, and how that was for you or how that affected your work at the time.
There you go. Lissia?
Shall I stop sharing the screen? Sorry. Mia?
It's completely up to you. If you'd like to see everyone else's faces, you're welcome to stop sharing the screen, but it's quite nice to see the work, so it's up to you.
Okay, I'll leave the Testing Ground images on for now. Corellia, I was going to answer.
Should I go, Lissia?
Yeah.
Well, actually, it was quite difficult for me to work from so far, considering like I always did site visits to things that where I was going to perform in or show in. It was important for me to see how people move in that space and what it felt like atmospherically. But also it was quite challenging because I had had a really tragic, life-threatening accident, car accident, like that year, and so I was actually relying a lot on my mum in this process, and so somehow the experience of working from home was forced this sort of collaboration. She had a lot of input as well on what I was doing, but also on the materials I had accessible, which had to be lightweight as well because I couldn't move my body as much and I couldn't have a lot of expectations of my concentration because of my concussion. So it was really interesting how it kind of ended up working in this way, whereas in the beginning I thought it was going to be something really scary to do, to take a participatory work into essentially a container, right? But then there was other ways that COVID as well, the pandemic, required me to reimagine touch and reimagine participation. And so the veil of the glass also challenged this as well. And I think the constant conversations with Nina and you know, having to reevaluate everything generally in the pandemic affected, you know, even the weight of the materials and the textures. Yeah, over to you, Licia.
Thank you, Corellia. In my case, it also affected me, and I think in this way, in a positive way, because I usually do paintings, and so I thought, how could I participate in this exhibition and do something from home? But I started doing a lot of drawings during the pandemic, small drawings. And I think the etchings also came into there and elevated my drawings into something more conclusive, something more with a bit more process involved. And I think even in the etchings, I'm not sure if you're able to notice, you can see my peers who I drew, they were wearing masks. So they were in the workshops or in the studios. And it's quite interesting because obviously etching has such a long history. And now to see an etching or a figure wearing a mask is quite, I think, powerful. It really shows how we are progressing in time and in art history.
Thank you, Licia. Would you like to jump in? I know that the pandemic and working remotely changed things in your practice too, because you also do paintings.
The most challenging thing for me was not being able to see or know what anyone else was making, and which made it challenging to make work in connection to what others were making. Making work at home without access to Slade's facilities was also challenging. However, it did push me to think of new and creative ways of creating artworks that can work well digitally and physically. And lastly, being isolated from the other exhibitors reduced my communication with them, making it difficult to envision the exhibition's final outcome.
Thank you, Abby. From a curatorial perspective, this was a huge challenge. And the slide that I showed here is an important slide. I left it on. It would take me too long to read out every single name on this slide, but it really wasn't possible, wouldn't have been possible to have this outcome without the input and contribution of every single person on this list, on this slide, at every step of the way. And we had an amazing project team, but being able to think about how the exhibition would all come together in a coherent way required a lot of faith at every step from everybody, and including even the technicians when it came to the install, because we were unable to provide a detailed brief of what the work would actually entail. I think that this has been the most rewarding experience, although it had been difficult from a curatorial perspective. I had never worked on an exhibition in this way before, where there were so many unknowns, but yet in the end it all comes together. Are there any other questions in the chat? Because I can ask a few more questions.
Jody just had a question. Oh, sorry, Mia, you were going to read it out. You go ahead.
No, so Jody has asked, are there any stories or collection items that really inspired you but didn't make the cut for this show?
if no one's jumping in, I can jump in a little bit on that, because I know that there were a few requests, and I do know that Abby had a longer list and some objects that really couldn't make it, or either for their the condition in which they were in or their size. The belt with the cowrie seeds that comes from the ethnography collection was particularly challenging for installation as well, because it requires textile to display textile over time, requires a particular display, a particular display setup, because the exhibition is on for a long time, for a year. But there were other objects from the Petrie collection that were considered. One made the cut. And then there's the question of space, that we really wanted to make sure that we had enough space for all the students' work. And these cases are actually a little bit smaller than what they look. So yes. I have a question in the meantime, which is, was there anything in particular that's is memorable for you, that is your key takeaway from this experience of working on this exhibition?
I think, I'm sorry, may I go? I think trust, both trusting, because as Abby said as well, like not knowing what other people were doing, and sort of even I think trusting, like I could really take the trust in me, and also the trust in communication. That's something I can really take away from this experience. And also because I was always so reliant on performance as my main medium, and then having to change that completely for this, like just I think trust would be the key word for me here. Yeah.
And I would add to what Corellia mentioned as well. I think it's not being afraid to respond to a collection or to a research, and that we as an artist are capable of developing our practices to new mediums and to new ways of working. And we are capable of working through difficult times, as it was during the pandemic. And it's just incredible to see how resilient we are, and how we came with solutions for everything that came through our way.
And contexts as well that I would like otherwise never imagine. I mean, you know, it has a different weight to be working around our archival objects and within more of a museum context. And so how, like the unexpected of that as well, that where you could possibly position yourself within that. That's something, like nothing is ever, there's no limit to where you might be able to apply yourself, really. I don't know if that makes sense, yeah.
Abby, would you like to add to that?
Showing work alongside other artists at the Slade that I would not have otherwise been able to exhibit with, collaborating with UCL Culture and Anthropology Department, which I also would not have been able to do without this project. Lastly, having a platform to present my wallpaper designs to passers-by and UCL's community.
Thank you. It was certainly a a real challenge not to be able to get all the artists together. And many of them, it's important to say, even till today, we haven't managed to get everybody together at the same time. And that feels very odd. And we weren't able to do a private view or a drinks launch or a tea launch at the time in which we finished installing in November. So it has been a journey, but as you've all said, we've all grown from this and built up quite a lot of our resilience and adaptability. And there was a lot of agility in this.
Hi, Nina. So just one final question from Helen in the chat. Having worked separately to create the pieces, were there any interesting or surprising connections that emerged when works were being placed together for the exhibition?
Well, I hope that the connections were revealed in the presentation, and many of these were, unplanned. But it also was through the conversations, the ones who had the insight of what everybody is doing was myself and the project team, in particular, our amazing project manager, Veronica Dominiak, and Victoria Kingston, who worked with me on the interpretation, and Maria Blazinski, who also helped with the project management. And the Slade Curators, the Slade team, who were working closely as well with the students, who had insight in the challenges that the students were facing in making the work on the ground. And so the project team had the overview, and we were able, particularly myself and Veronica, we were able to have in the individual conversations with the students, we were able to explore ways in which we anticipated things could work and mesh together. And then also it was about where we place the work. So we didn't really want to be too prescriptive in saying at the beginning what case we allocate. But there was a point in which that really became necessary in order for the work to continue to be developed in line with the space it was allocated. So there were points and stages in which we had to kind of plan and collate and think about how the works come together.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of this event. There's still plenty of time to visit this series of exhibitions. I'll just put myself on the screen so I'm not just a voice.
I'm going to stop sharing this.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. Hello, there so that brings us to the end of this event. There is still plenty of time to visit this series of exhibitions, including the virtual library exhibition, Word as Art, Beauty in the Margins, which you can visit online. And I'm sure Chris will drop the link in the chat. So thank you all so much for attending. Thank you to our guest speakers, Abby, Licia and Corellia. Thank you to Nina for wonderful hosting and sharing. Thank you to Slade School and UCL Culture for putting together these amazing exhibitions. I hope to see you all soon at the next exhibition or private view, and hopefully next time in person. So thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.